we're back in the smoke-filled room, and we're here in the week of Independence Day, 4th of July. We're recording this on Wednesday, since none of us are going to be around to record this on 4th of July on our usual day. We're, of course, releasing on Friday, so this will be released the day after 4th of July or Independence Day. We wanted to do a special Veterans episode back on Memorial Day, but the party, a little bit frustratingly, decided to host the state convention on Memorial Day weekend, so we weren't able to do a special Veterans episode when we wanted to on Memorial Day. So we decided we would do it here. It's pretty appropriate, this being Independence Day week. So we have as 3 guests with us this week, all veterans, and surprisingly, all veterans of the Air Force. So if you served in the Army or Marines or Navy, you're probably going to be a little jealous that you're not on this episode of the podcast, because we apparently are just all flyboys this week. And so I'm sure we're going to have lots of competition here amongst our Air Force veterans. Let's go through our introductions here. We've got Craig Wilcox. He's an Illinois State Senator from the 32nd District, also previously served as a McHenry County Board member and was a colonel in the Air Force. So, Craig, thank you for being with us, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Collin. Always a pleasure to be asked to participate.
And you're a returning guest, so clearly you must have done something right the first time, because Lane and Abby said, let's get him back on again.
Thank you.
All right, we have David Freeze. He's the state representative from District 115. He is also a veteran of the Air Force. He was a tech sergeant in the Air Force. So, David, same to you. Thanks for being here, and thank you for your service.
Well, it's my pleasure to serve, and appreciate being on. And this is my first time, and we'll see how we do. Hopefully I'll come back again.
I like it. We've also got Mayor Keith Pekau. He's the mayor of Orland Park. He's a small business owner, and he was a weapons system officer in the Air Force, so also a veteran. So once again, Keith, thank you for being here, and thank you, sir, for your service.
Thanks, Collin, and congratulations on your son as well. I know we haven't seen each other, so congratulations.
Thank you very much. We, for those of you who are watching, you don't know we're starting a few minutes late because my boy had a doctor's appointment that, of course, went late, because why wouldn't it on the day we're trying to record the podcast? But we're here, so that's the good news. We also have course political experts. We've got Chris Jackowiak and Michael Butler, and they are ready to go, especially Michael, who had to miss last week's episode, so I know he's ready to bring the fire this week.
That's right.
All right, so we're going to talk veterans issues for just a moment before we get into the political topics of the week. It's not often we have 1, let alone 3 veterans on our podcast. So I really just want to start here. I want to celebrate our veterans on Independence Day and just ask our guests if they have any stories from their time in service that they'd like to share for our audience. We've got a lot of people who watch the podcast throughout the state, and I know they're going to be out celebrating our Independence Day, and that's thanks to veterans like you 3. So we'd certainly love to hear some stories from your service and your time serving our country.
Yeah, real quick. So thanks. I served in Desert Storm as a flight engineer on the 141, and prior to that, I actually had the privilege to go all over the world to see a lot of different things, a lot of different cultures. And I can tell you this, I count my blessings every time I wake up here in the United States. It is truly is a blessing.
So, David,
Greg, you were going to go ahead.
Yeah, those 141s are amazing aircraft. I was going to kind of tie what I maybe didn't realize is possibly my first introduction to woke, but also the independence aspect. So we took the 52nd and 54th Combat Comm Squadrons into Iraq in 2003. And after arriving in late March 2003, obviously things were interesting at that point in time. But when the Saddam statue got toppled in Baghdad, our Air Force unit lineage from the 8th Air Force Conquerors was changed to the Liberators. And I guess I could see the possible concern at the time, but it seemed a little odd. But by July 4th, we were in a place where we were able to put a flag mast up on top of the building that we'd taken over for the comm squadron, had a full squadron retreat, raised the flag, had a great 4th of July barbecue. So from woke to understanding the independence and the freedom of this country in a matter of a few short months in foreign hostile territory. So that's one of my great memories from my service.
I guess I'll jump in. There's all kinds of flying stories, but I'll try and keep it relatively short and maybe stick with the combat theme. So I deployed 3 times in the 90s So the aftermath of Desert Storm and Southern Watch. But my second deployment is when the first time I flew combat sorties, and the very first combat sortie was actually a daytime sortie going up into Iraq to Talil Air Base. But there's nothing as a at that time 25-year-old with a pregnant wife at home, stepping to an airplane with bombs strapped on it and flying into a hostile territory that puts things in perspective really, really quick. And we hear this all the time from people, oh, they're young, and oh, they can grow up later. And it's like, we were 25, most of us were in our 20s, and we're going in there and dropping bombs and getting shot at. And at the end of the day, everyone talks about, oh, we fought for our country. You hear people say, oh, they fought for their country. I'm going to tell you what, when you get in there, you're fighting for the guy in the front seat, the guys next to you. You're fighting to get home. You're not thinking about your country. You're not thinking about, that's all important. It's all important reasons why we served. It's all something that we're very proud of. But when push comes to shove, we're fighting for our teammates, for the people that we're in there with. And whether they're your squadron mates or they're Navy guys, unfortunately, the Navy usually were late and not quite on target. But nonetheless, whether it was the Navy or the Marines or the Army that were down below us that required us to be there and protect them, that's when it really starts to hit home that this is real and what you're fighting for. And to emphasize what David said, when you've seen other parts of the world, every time you're in America, you should be really thankful.
I think we missed the boat. We should have had one from multiple branches of service so that you guys could end up going at it, like which one was the best. I think we kind of screwed the pooch on that. But I know my wife, her grandpa, and my grandpa both were in the Marines. And I've got to imagine that some of our viewers are, cheering for their branch of service. Anybody want to, maybe give a dig to their friends in Army or any of the other branches since you get a chance now?
Collin, I'll give a shout out to him. So we were, Keith, at Talil in 2003, which we established in enemy territory, and the Marines had been out in the desert since January. And as an Air Force comm squadron, intelligence demands, bandwidth, we had no problem making calls home. So when those Marines came out of Nasiriyah, came up from Kuwait, when they got to our air base, it was our pleasure to offer them, in some cases, the first phone call home in many months for them. And then for the Army, the Army is the logistics trail. So after 6 weeks of eating MREs, when that Army quartermaster showed up, we were happy to provide phone calls home for fresh fruit and other food that didn't come in a prepackaged pouch. So for those counterparts on the ground, once you're over there, it is all one big team. And we learned that after some terrible episodes, 4 decades ago, that joint fighting forces are much better when they're working together as a team.
Who of the group is some of us, our only experience with the Air Force is, watching Top Gun or Masters of the Air. I thought that was a pretty good show on Apple Plus. So which of you is the cocky flyboy, is the Tom Cruise of the group? I'm looking at you, Keith. I just, I know you're the best. And I think that's kind of you, but anybody want to fight for the title or fight against the title?
I think David.
No, I can see Keith. I can see you being the Tom Cruise in Top Gun 3.
Well, I did. I think I'm the only one here that flew, but I flew fighters. I flew the coolest fighter in the Air Force when I was there, flying Strike Eagles. It was brand new, so it was the hot jet, and it was great. It was great to do. Flew with a lot of fantastic people, and if you think of Top Gun, people always ask, well, what's a WISO? What's a weapon system officer? Basically, I was Goose, or in the new one, I was Bob. But everyone has a job to do when they're in there, and if it wasn't for, there's a reason there's 2 cockpits. It takes 2 guys to employ the airplane in a combat scenario. So that's why there's 2 of us, and we share the load and share the work. And to Craig's point, it was important that the Navy hits their targets. They send their Tomahawk missiles and soften the target before we go there. It's important that the Army's there and the Marines are there to handle things on the ground, because you can do, as we proved in Desert Storm, you can do a lot with just air power. But at the end of the day, if you want to mop it up, you got to have people on the ground that go in there. So it's a team effort for everybody. And then the Coast Guard keeps us safe at home.
Nice. Question from me before we move to the next agenda topic. I've seen this move to call it July 4th or 4th of July instead of Independence Day. I don't know. Maybe it's just me that always drove me crazy, and it's Independence Day. I feel like calling it the 4th of July in some ways weakens what it actually is. Is it just me? I'm just more for you guys are military guys. Is that just me being overly sensitive, or is there something to that?
I'd never even thought about it. I just always referred to it as Independence Day. Yeah. And I can't see it being called anything else, to be honest with you.
I mean, it's almost exclusively called 4th of July now. It's not called Independence Day or anything related to that. It's the 4th of July, as if the date or the day is the holiday versus what we're actually celebrating on that day.
Well, Collin, wait for tomorrow when our current president calls it Happy 4th of St. Thanksgiving. We've got a shirt in our shop for that. So.
Is it or is it they're going to announce some kind of trans celebration day like they did on Easter?
You
know,
never
Collin,
know with this crew.
I mean, I just kind of view both of those things as being synonymous. I mean, to me, 4th of July means it's our birthday and it's Independence Day. But you know, I suppose I can see why people would get upset if people are calling it 4th of July. To me, it you know, as long as people understand what it means, that's the important thing, whatever they call it.
Well, let's be clear. I am a millennial, which means I'm a snowflake. So clearly, I'm just overly sensitive to what we call the day. All right, let's move on in our agenda. Question for our elected officials, which are all three of you, who are also veterans. You know, having seen candidates and elected officials who have served this country in some capacity, it really does seem to me that you guys are ideally suited for public service in elected office. And Keith, I want to start with you on this just because we've got a lot of experience sort of having these types of conversations. You know, is there a difference really in leaders who step up, who maybe aren't politicians, but already have a lifetime or a history of serving the country? Does that make a difference in public service?
I think it makes a difference. I don't think it, you know, every individual is an individual, but I think as a whole, it makes a huge difference. What I learned in my time in the Air Force about leadership and about people and what this country stands for has been very important to me as mayor. I would say that all my other 20 some years of life experience, other than the military, it's the leadership aspect came from my 10 years or almost 10 years in the military. And I think it also gives you a perspective of why you're there, why you're serving, what's important, why the Constitution matters. And to David's point about seeing other parts of the world, we can turn into other parts of the world if we're not diligent in protecting our Constitution. And you know, Collin, because you dealt with me during COVID, I constantly use COVID as the Constitution as a barometer for the decisions I made. If I'm closing things down, I'm taking away someone's rights, I better be damn sure that I know exactly what I'm doing and have irrefutable evidence to do that. And that irrefutable evidence never existed. In fact, they were making it up. And we were able to identify that. And that really informed a lot of my decision making.
Yeah, I saw that firsthand. And it is an interesting comparison. I mean, I think you see a lot of politicians who I think if they're handed a constitution, it might be the first time they've ever seen that document or read that document. I think that the first step when people get elected to state office, maybe with you guys down there, Craig and David, would be give them a little pocket constitution to give them a little primer. But I think that's a great point, Keith.
Well, they always say that the Constitution is the most quoted and least read document in Washington, D.C., and I think that's true.
Probably not wrong. Craig, David, have you guys seen a difference in candidates and elected officials who have had a history of service?
My perspective is if you serve in the military, you serve with individuals from all over the United States, different backgrounds, different income levels. You want to talk about diversity? That's it. And it's not based off of your skin color or sexual identity or gender. I mean, it truly is diverse. And it doesn't matter what your background is. You've got a mission, and everybody works together regardless of your background to accomplish that mission. And the key, part, your job is not only take care of you, but to look after your buddy who's, and the people in the Army and Marines specifically know this, first and foremost, you want to make sure that the guy's got your six. I was in the Air Force, thank goodness. I didn't have to experience a lot of that. But that's what it means to work together for a common goal. And I think that's part of what we in the military experience. And I think that does lend to serving in public office, really do.
Well said. And Collin, I think you hit on it, right? It's that commitment to the Constitution. I often wonder for newly elected officials, is that the first time they've ever been asked to take an oath to the Constitution? The military goes through that routinely, promotions, enlistment, and I think the commitment to that oath is significant, whether you're first responders or military. But if you're an elected official and the first oath you've ever taken is you're swearing in, then I think there's some work to be done. And I think that's the tie that, in your words, does it make a veteran, a better elected official? I think they're more prepared at that point. Not to say you can't be as prepared coming from other professions, but from that core commitment to that oath and what it really means, I think is significant. But in preparation, I'll give you the visual when you're next time in an elected official's office. I'm looking forward to the north wing of the Capitol building to be redone. These are a couple paintings. That one's called We the People. And this one is called Freedom. And these were painted by Chow Yun, a Chinese dissident who spent time in Tibet, finally went to Japan, made his way to the US, had been a fabulous artist, had pictures and paintings burned in the past. But when he traveled the US from, I think it was New York to LA and Maine to Texas, just seeing the freedom, the spirit, the living, it changed his nature as an artist. And when it takes foreign dissidents to recognize what we should be treasuring every day, that's what I'm looking for people to, ponder a little bit on this Independence Day weekend. But the next time you're in an elected official's office, take a look at what's on the wall. And that might tell you a little bit about how they see themselves in that position.
Interesting. I like that insight. Thank you for that.
And one other thing I would add about that, about the Constitution, is that when you're in the military, I served under Bush and Clinton. It doesn't matter whether they're Democrat, Republican, or whatever. At the end of the day, they're the commander in chief. And if they give orders that are legal that you don't like, you still follow them, because that's the way our system works. And you don't get to have, as a military member, you don't get to have a vote. Well, something as a mayor that I've tried to remember is I'm serving everybody. And I have to follow the law. Even things I don't like, I still have to do things within the law. So, and people don't seem to understand that. And quite frankly, in our party, there's some people that really don't understand that. That, there are things that elected officials have to do that we may or may not like doing, but we're required and bound to do it because there is a Constitution and there is a law. So if you don't like it, win elections, get enough people to change the laws.
Well, speaking of elections, let's go to our next topic. I want to pass it to Michael and Chris to start us off on this, just because they haven't had a chance to share. We don't, as you guys know, who watch this podcast over the last year plus, we don't tend to wade into national politics, but something's happened in the last week since we recorded our previous podcast that we must speak about, and it's going to have ties to Illinois. So we're actually going to have three different topics on this exact same thing, which is the Joe Biden debate disaster. We're going to get everybody's thoughts on just the debate itself and what we witnessed. And then we'll talk about the ties to Illinois and what it means for Illinois. So just starting on the debate, I mean, my point on this was, I was talking to Abby, my wife, just how shocked most of the country was, because the media has spent the last 3 years covering up how old and frail and out of touch Joe Biden is. And so for the first time on a national stage, people who aren't clued in realize just what's happening right now in the White House. And I think they did themselves a disservice on many levels, because that was actually pretty good for Joe Biden, believe it or not. But I think the public was shocked because it had been covered up for many, many years at this point, just what point Joe Biden's at. And it reverberated. It was a disaster of epic proportions on the debate stage. Michael or Chris, why don't you just kick us off on what we saw in that debate and just how awful that performance was?
I wasn't on Smoke Filled Room last week, but I obviously watched it, after the fact. And Chris made one comment at the end where he said, The debate doesn't matter. It's not going to change anything. And look at this. The Democrats, he was wrong. The Democrats may actually swap this guy out because it was such a disaster. And I saw one clip on Instagram where like a kind of a commentator was talking about it. And one of the points that he made was that Joe Biden basically fact checked the media for 90 minutes straight. Because like you said, Collin, they had spent the last, 3 years covering this up, saying, oh, these tapes are edited. They're cheap fakes. Don't believe them. Joe Biden's is just fine. He's a great president.
He's running marathons behind closed doors.
Yeah.
We all saw it. You just haven't seen it. Yeah.
Exactly. And then this was a big hit to their credibility. I mean, we all, pay attention to this every day. And we know other examples of things that they said about President Trump that ended up not being true, or accusations that, they just let slide by without even questioning it. But this one was one of the most visual examples of this that 50 million Americans saw. And now you look at the polls and it's looking like this could be a repeat of 1984. Like President Trump could end up winning, 30 something states and, having an absolute blowout in the electoral college if they're not able to, swap Joe Biden out for somebody else. So it's going to be a very, very interesting next month.
So Michael,
we'll talk, as I mentioned before, we will talk about Biden possibly getting swapped out and what the impact is down ballot. We've got special topics set up to cover those specifically next. So everyone save your thoughts on those two topics for when we get to those officially. Go ahead, Chris.
So if Michael would have let me go first, I was going to admit that I was wrong, which would have been the first time ever. First time ever that I would have been wrong. But, I was wrong because I was going into that debate with a very pessimistic outlook of, honestly, the American populace and the media. I expected Biden to do terribly, but everyone was going to say at the end of the day that, Biden actually did great. It was one of the best debate performances of all time, similar to what Michael was just talking about that we had seen from the media and the Democratic Party over the last 3 years. It was a terrible debate. And, Biden did poorly. He couldn't finish sentences. Trump had a few zingers. It could have been much worse for Biden. Trump obviously himself isn't on his 2016 peak Trump debate form anymore. He himself has gotten older. He himself has slowed down. Now, Trump slowing down still puts him, miles ahead of Biden. And that's why the entire Democratic establishment and media freaked out over this, because there was such a gap between two of them at this debate. It could have been worse for Biden. Had Trump been on his 2016 form, they would have already pulled Biden out of this race.
Honestly, Chris, that was exactly what I was thinking the whole time, which was, Biden did awful. But if we just had a decent debater up on stage, this race would have been called. Like, they wouldn't have even held the election. They just would have said, it's over. Let's just start the transition now. I mean, there were so many moments where there could have just been a complete put away of Biden that Trump just sort of let fly away. So it definitely could have been worse. You're right about that.
And there was a few moments in there, like where Trump got Biden on when he said he beat Medicare, whatever the heck he was talking about there.
Killed Medicare. Or when the one zinger he did get was, I don't even know what he just said. Heck, he didn't even know what he just said. I mean, there were a few good zingers in there, but it could have been much worse.
Well, I think part of the reason
a highlight reel, but
I think that there was a lot of talk about the debate rules and who that was going to benefit, leading up to this debate. And one of the rules was that when one person's talking, the other person's mic is turned off. And I think that really benefited Trump in the long run because it kind of corralled him a little bit. And we didn't see, like we did in that first debate in 2020, where he kept trying to interject. And I also think that it might have been, maybe this is giving them a little bit too much credit, but maybe not. It might have been a little bit of a strategic play for Trump to kind of hold back a little bit, especially when you watch that first 15 minutes where Biden just his voice was hoarse. He was rambling. That first question was when he said that, when we finally beat Medicare, it's kind of like when your opponent's digging their own grave, don't, help them out. Just let them go.
Yeah, fair enough. Curious. I know you guys have experience in elected office. All three of you, I'm sure, have served and have done forums, have done debates of some kind. I can imagine if any of the three of you were up on stage, if you were watching, you're probably like, oh, you could have said this.
I was at a debate watch party, which I don't particularly like doing, but was at it anyways. And a couple of things that I said, hey, he should jump on this. He actually did early on. Trump did. So I was like, wow, he's and then he kind of trailed off. But I think it was important for Trump to not do what he did in the first debate the last time, and just if you're to let Biden do this the first time, like, he might be president now, instead of acting the way that he did. So I think that was good. Anyone who is surprised by this is adult who wasn't paying attention, because it's you have to suspend disbelief. But I think the biggest thing for me as an American is I'm frightened right now. I mean, I am not going to be surprised at all if China goes into Taiwan, if Iran lobs missiles to Israel. Are you ever going to have a time as one of our enemies to make a move when you have this kind of weakness in the presidency? I have never seen it in my lifetime until now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Republican Democrat to have that weak of someone in the White House does put our country more at risk. And it does lead to questions as to who's running the country. Is it the guy we elected to run the country, or who's actually pulling the strings? Because clearly this guy's got 2 or 3 lucid hours per day, and who's running the country the other 22, 21 hours? I mean, it leads to a lot of questions. Yeah,
no, Keith, it mentioned exactly my biggest concern is, his competence right now. It's not, who's going to get elected in November. It's like, who is running the country right now? If you're Putin and you're watching this, anybody who's got ambitions to expand their influence in the world, now is the time to do it, because Biden's not there. It's really sad. Somebody's propping him up. I don't know if it's his wife or somebody else behind the scenes, but this is really concerning for myself. I guess, because what happens when something does happen? Well, now we're members of ex-members of the service. Somebody's going to have to step in and try and remedy a situation that's going to happen overseas as a result of Biden being a really impotent leader.
Well, David, to your question, right? The president said he'd had no military lives lost on his watch.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Are they not telling him?
There's some Gold Star families that are pretty angry about that.
Are they not telling him? And so, to Keith, to your point, I'm not worried about what China decides to do now. Our allies and our enemies have seen this for the past few years and have already acted on this weak presidency. There's no doubt. And then more nationally, what this tells me is that the administrative state is truly running everything. And thank goodness the Supreme Court is taking a look at some of that with a recent ruling, because that's a group of non-elected officials with significant power right now when the executive has either acquiesced or fails to hold that power. And really, to me, it puts a challenge straight in Congress's lap. They need to take back the power and the authority that they have, and that's going to be a challenge as well.
Yeah, those bureaucrats don't answer to anybody. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, Craig, I want to go right back to you. Let's go to our next topic. I know this is something you've been looking at yourself, and just this last week, my data people have been crunching all sorts of numbers, because you basically have to throw the old data out. This election, if they don't change who is at the top of the ticket, suddenly we're looking at a very different electorate in November. What impact is Biden's plummeting poll numbers going to have on down ballot races? Let's talk specifically about Illinois. I've got to imagine this is going to have an impact on November, and you basically have to rethink everything now.
Yeah, I know that Chris and Michael have some more detailed thoughts. I think the conclusion that I'm kind of coming to is that this is likely to suppress voter turnout on the Democrat side if things remain the way they are. It's going to be a little bit of apathy, which means down ballot, there's an opportunity, depending on how those Democrat candidates engage their electorate. If they think that it's a presidential election cycle and they're just going to sweep in on these large numbers, then there's an opportunity for a Republican opponent there. If on the flip side, they're decent at campaigning and they go and energize voters for themselves, then maybe they can mitigate that a little bit. But that's where I'm thinking that minus any changes, or, another 8 weeks of just these outright flubs in public, then it significantly matters down ballot.
Well, you think about, I know for our strategy on the Republican side, it's been to try to localize our races. We don't want it nationalized. We don't want it nationalized. Meanwhile, Democrats, they've spent the last 4 years nationalizing every election. I think now they've created a pretty rough spot for them, because they've nationalized the election. So everyone's focused on the national elections. And suddenly Democrats are going to try to flip the script and be like, no, it's not about the national. It's about the local. They're going to have to scramble here to change the entire narrative of everything that they've put out for the last several years. This really puts them in a trick bag for sure.
And the advantage the Republicans were going to if there was an advantage the Republicans were going to have for the 2024 election, is that there already was a diminished enthusiasm amongst the Democratic Party over a number of issues, namely the Israel-Palestine issue was pulling away the left wing of the Democratic Party away from the center against Joe Biden over that particular issue. And Republicans could have taken advantage of that issue by encouraging that lower turnout in various ways and increasing our own turnout. This whole debate, assuming Biden's the nominee still, which we're going to talk about in our next topic, whether or not that's even going to be the case, but assuming Biden's the nominee still, I believe you could see a enthusiasm gap so strong between the Republican and Democratic parties that you're going to witness very interesting things showing up on election day. I'm not going to say that every Republican's going to win and somehow the Republicans are going to retake the Illinois House of Representatives. I don't think that's going to happen. But I do think you might see some races down ballot where Republicans are going to be overperforming by maybe 10, 15 points of where they're at of 2022, if the current polling trends continue, just because of how much diminished enthusiasm there will be on the Democratic side of the ticket, and independents and moderates shifting so far to the right or voting third party that you're going to see some a better chance for Republicans down ballot. Things can change, as we will talk about, but this is a new advantage the Republican Party has in a very significant direction that needs to be taken advantage of.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't change persuasion, right? We've talked on previous episodes of this podcast. Everybody knows how they're going to vote nationally. This doesn't change who people are going to vote for. It changes more than anything whether or not they're going to vote. Maybe some people change their minds. That's certainly possible. There's 300 plus million people in the country, so some will change their minds. But as for a number that's statistically relevant, the big change here is turnout. I think both of you guys have already said it. Who turns out, who doesn't? Turnout drives elections. And so if you see diminished turnout on the left, or you see swing voters who maybe the more liberal swing voters or the more liberal independents don't show up, and that could have a massive impact on the final election results. Anybody else have thoughts on how this will impact down ballot races?
Well, leading up to this debate, if you looked at like some of the U.S. Senate races in those swing states across the country, those incumbent Democrats, like, in Montana and Pennsylvania and et cetera, were like outperforming Biden by, 2 to 3 points, in the averages of those polls. So, they've got a little bit of buffer, but those candidates have a really tough decision to make on, what they want to do moving forward, especially if Biden is the nominee. Do they throw him under the bus? Do they start criticizing him? And if you've got that bifurcated thing where you've got, a local or a down ballot candidate criticizing the presidential candidate, how does that impact the Democrat electorate? Who shows up? Those kind of things. I mean, if I was the Democrats, I would just give up on president and then just pour all your money into House and Senate races, because that's probably your best path forward. I mean, we're going to talk about, some of the short list later, but, there have been polls that have been done post debate where if we swap out, Biden for so-and-so, what's the matchup look like? Well, Trump's beating all of them. So they're in a tough spot.
Well, and Michael, yeah, absolutely. And Michael, I would say to the Democrats, welcome to our world. I mean, if you had to work in politics, especially in the suburban areas, which I know you guys all represent areas that would be considered suburban, this has been our life. Since 2015, 2016, we've had to overperform the top of our ticket, because while Trump may win nationally, he hasn't done super well, especially not in the Chicagoland suburban area. So we've had to live in this reality where we've had to overperform the top of our ticket by 5-10 points just to win elections. So to Democrats, I say, welcome to our world. Now you get to live our pain that we've had to live for the last decade. I would say Republicans at this point have a decade of experience doing it. Meanwhile, Democrats are just going to have to learn how to do it in the next 4 months. And 4 months is not enough time to relearn how you politic. So they're definitely in a trick bag for sure, Michael. I think you're right on that. let's jump into the juicy topic because this ties into Illinois. I know everyone wants to talk about this. So if Biden is replaced, there's a short list, which two things I find to be really funny about this. First, the first round of shortlist candidates, names that were out there, didn't include Biden or J.B. Pritzker, which I think ticked off Pritzker's team to no end. I think they've gotten their press operation to do their job, and now every list includes Pritzker. That poll that Michael mentioned about candidates, they did a poll about who could they replace Biden with. Pritzker performed the worst out of all the candidates that they tested. It was only by a couple points, but he was the lowest performer of the 7 or 8 or 9 candidates they tested. So I find that kind of funny. But Pritzker has been angling for this for a while now, and now it's reality. I would find it just deliciously ironic if they do swap out the presidential nominee or candidate, but they don't pick Pritzker. I just would find that pretty delicious. But either way, Pritzker's been angling for this. He wants it. There's been rumors for months now that this has been part of the plan. And I would say the fact that they held this debate as early as they did kind of lends credence to the concept that this very well may have been part of the plan. But let me open it up. Y'all have fun with this topic. This is going to be a lot of fun.
So I'll jump in here. First off, you want to talk about a threat to democracy. You have an election where you didn't let people run, and then you kick people off. You basically replace them with someone else. There's your threat to, I mean, that's actually usurping the democratic process. So it's not even a threat. It actually happened. That's the first thing. The second thing, as far as J.B. Pritzker, I think heads we win, tails he loses. If he doesn't get picked, he's going to be hurt, and he very well might take his ball and go home if the Democratic Party makes it clear he never has a shot at the presidency, because that's what he's here for. And once he does that, will he actually keep spending money when it's not for his personal gain on the Democratic Party? That might actually help us all throughout the state of Illinois. Secondly, let's hope they pick him, because that will bury him once and for all, because I think Trump will absolutely destroy him. And then he's done as governor as well, more than likely. So both of those things potentially, let's hope those come to fruition and we can rid ourselves of his billions, which is essentially what's propping up the Democratic Party right now.
Yeah, you nailed it right there, Keith.
So I'd imagine the problem with like some of those people that were lower in that poll, like Pritzker and others, I mean, their name ID has got to be, pretty low in comparison to the people that were higher on that list. And if you got 4 months till election day and you're trying to swap Joe Biden out for somebody else, you need to pick somebody that has high name ID and low favorables or low unfavorables. And, Newsom and Pritzker and some of those, they're going to have a tough time with that.
Well,
and you've got, the one thing he has is those billions, right? I mean, if you're going to swap it out, Chris, go ahead. I'm clearly stealing your point.
Right. That's what I was going to say. Like, yes, Pritzker was the lowest performing candidate in that poll because nobody nationally actually knows who J.B. Pritzker is yet. But if he gets the nomination and drops $1 billion in his campaign account day one, that's going to change. So I'm not entirely sold on the idea that Pritzker would get blown out by Trump or would be, an automatic loser going into November. I do agree with Keith that is a heads we win, tails you lose situation. So that's wonderful. I think there's potential there, but I wouldn't write off Pritzker's ability to win a national election because of the money factor in all of this. The other thing is, you're seeing in the media the last couple of days that it probably won't be Pritzker anyway, because we're already seeing the push to Kamala. I'm assuming that there are some people behind the scenes in DC who are saying we cannot afford the face of we're going to not have the African-American woman vice president move up the ticket if we do decide to move the old white guy out. That would be a bad look for the Democratic Party from an aesthetics perspective if they were to do that. And that's why I think the media and a lot of the Democratic spokespeople have been propping up Kamala Harris over the past 48 hours because it's moving in that direction. Things can change. Money matters. Convention's in Chicago. Pritzker's got money. So it could still be Pritzker, and I don't think he'd be the worst choice for the Democrats. But right now, I think
Chris, I made the same point to Abby. Think about the progression, right? If you want to strategize for the future, you got to think about what moves could then follow the next moves. If you skip over Kamala Harris, you can't skip over a female and a black woman and then go with a white male. You have to then either go with a minority or a female. And so I don't see there's any world in which it can be Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker. You're going to have to end up with a Gretchen Whitmer or Stacey Abrams, or you're going to have to check at least one of those boxes if you skip over Kamala Harris, because that's what the Democrats do, right? It's about checking boxes. You can't skip over your vice president who checks 2 boxes to pick somebody who checks 0 boxes. And so I don't know that there's a political, there's a path for JB other than if he makes it into a giant floor fight. I mean, if this, we're all assuming that this is all, some people in a back room moving some pieces around, but let's be real. You look at these protests happening out in the streets, this thing will not be perfectly orchestrated. This will not be clean if it happens. It will light the whole Democratic Party on fire. And so if it's perfectly orchestrated, sure, we can all make our guesses as to what would happen. If I'm Pritzker's team, I'm not going to assume that I get the choice, but this being in Chicago, kind of like we've seen in some of the TV shows, I'd say, fine, I'll just mount a floor fight and I'll whip up delegates on the floor. I mean, so I don't think the door is closed for Pritzker. I just don't think he'll be the first choice.
Well,
Yeah.
one thing, probably, it was
Hold on,
probably
Michael, hold on. Let's let Craig go ahead.
Yeah.
And so, Collin, to that front, right? The big question is, where has all the Think Big America money gone? Has it really gone to his ideological thought processes, or has it been going to those Democrats who control significant number of delegates? Now, I'm not watching Newsom or Whitmer as much as I watch Pritzker, but he's the only one that, in my mind, has actually been playing, how do I get to 4,000 delegates for months? And so that's why I think there's a potential chance, right? And remember, he just signed the bill to eliminate backroom smoke-filled veal who get plated. So how is that going to play against him when the convention is here in Illinois? If as Republicans, we aren't hammering that point the minute, right? Well, and maybe we should start right now, because the New York Times announced earlier today that Biden, to an ally, admitted he needs to think about his candidacy. So is that what's coming? And if so, I think we actually have an opportunity to have a play, either as a disruptor, an instigator in that DNC, just based on what Pritzker's done in Illinois.
Yeah, I think Chris
a
nailed
really
it.
good point.
You look at Kamala Harris. I don't see how they pass her up. The Democrats, they're phenomenal at playing identity politics, and they played it with her. You got to ask, why is she there? Is she actually qualified? And I think most people answer that question no, because she got out of the presidential race. She was the first one to bail out. Didn't even win her own state of California. So now they get slammed by playing identity politics, because by default she should be qualified to be president. I mean, that number one, your VP should be qualified to be the president. She is not. Everybody on that side of the aisle knows it, but yet they have to put her in that position, I think, if Biden does step down and decide not to run. So
why wouldn't they? And why wouldn't they choose her? I mean, David, I think you're right on this, but why wouldn't they choose her? Her poll numbers are the reason. I mean, if you look at the data of her poll numbers, if you're a Democratic operative, you basically have to understand that if you swap it, you probably do worse in the next election. I mean, her poll numbers are abysmal. Even one of our, so we've got a private Discord of some of our politicos throughout the state, and one very smart and astute one pointed out a data point, which is her poll numbers among African Americans, she was polling at 51% approval among African Americans. I mean, if she can't even bring that voting subset to the table, if she becomes the nominee, then are you really doing better by swapping out Biden for her? You're probably doing worse by swapping it out. And that's why you're right. Politically, it's suicide to skip over your vice president. But if you know that logically she's going to do worse in November, then why would you put her at the top?
Well, they have to. Here's one of the other reasons that they have to, because the African Americans right now are absolutely furious at the Democrat Party as a whole because of the immigration issue. So this not putting her in is going to be the nail in the coffin with the Democrats and the black vote, in my mind.
Today, July 3rd, 2024, she is less mentally capable than the current president. And she's demonstrated that for 3 years. Oh, yeah. And so that's their problem. To David's point, that's their problem. They know she's not qualified. They know she's worse than what they have, and yet they can't. They've been playing identity politics for so long. What can they do?
Yeah. So if you want to get into the act of how it happens, right? You've got to rely on Article 25 if Biden doesn't step down himself, right? You've got to get 2/3 of Congress to declare him incapable of serving. If they do that, Kamala's in the seat at that moment anyways. Who's to say they wouldn't then again do it to her a couple weeks later prior to the convention? And this comes down to, if you think it's going to be an open convention, how does that path look? If they don't do Article 25, you lose Wisconsin, Nevada, Texas, and Georgia, where Biden's name is still on the ballot. That can't happen to them if they replace him. So if you think,
and if they wait too long, Craig, I know you and I talked offline. If they wait too long, they're shit out of luck in Ohio. I mean, they are in a time crunch here.
Right. Well, and so if you believe this didn't just come about because of the bad debate performance, right? That the debate date was chosen, that things have been happening for 6 or 8 months, then the plan on how to get there is set. That's why I'm looking at the Friday, Sunday interview with ABC with Stephanopoulos. Does he have an aneurysm on live TV? Does the cocktail they've given to keep him up put him down? So what? Because it's one thing for them to say it, and then think about the trick bag for Republicans. To get 2/3 in Congress, you need Republicans to acknowledge incapacity. We've been saying it for 2 years, but can you say it when it means the Democrats might get a more viable presidential candidate, or do you say no? This is your guy. Craig,
you basically referenced Dave. I mean, the movie Dave, where they swap out the president for a body double and then swap him back in like an accident. I mean, I love that movie. I think it's awesome. We might be living that in real life.
Technically not. I was looking at the articles to see how it would play out, but I guess maybe it was done.
I take it more to pop culture, right? I'm not the constitutional expert. Michael, I know you've been trying to jump in. Why don't you close us out on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, we saw reports maybe 2 months ago or so that Kamala Harris was making phone calls, asking people what they thought of her running for governor of California in the midterms, in 2026. So she was already looking for a backup plan, knew that this wasn't going the way that, they wanted it to go. I could see them picking Gavin Newsom and then promising her hey, if you're on your best behavior for the next 4 months, we'll make sure you're governor out there kind of as a backup. But, the one person that the White House hid more than Joe Biden over the course of the last 3 years was Kamala Harris. They kept her, they didn't utilize her very much at all. I mean, the few times that they did, on the border and AI, and she had that famous quote where she said the interesting thing about AI is, I can't even remember what it was. It was so bad. But yeah, she's a disaster too. So, I mean, good luck, guys.
Right. Yeah. Well, this brings us to our song of the week, which closes out this topic. We put all of our thoughts into the generator. It spits out a song. We're going to all hear it for the first time. I'm looking at the lyrics of this thing. This song needs no introduction. I'm just going to play it. So enjoy.
Debate was rough. It didn't go well. Joe stumbled and mumbled. He looked unwell. Trump will win, Biden is toast. Folks are talking from coast to coast. Democrats scrambling for someone new, searching for a candidate to pull them through. Only one option, he's in the news, with billions to burn and far left views. J.B. Pritzker, yeah, he's our man, ready for Trump. He's got a plan. His progressive views have ruined your state. He's the perfect Democrat candidate. Like Biden, he wants open borders, spend billions on illegals and drug importers. New Democrat votes, it's so sweet. Never mind, our vets are sleeping on the streets. Violent criminals get to run free. Neighborhood unsafe families flee. Raising taxes on working families. Gotta fund his far left fantasies. J.B. Pritzker, yeah, he's our man, ready for Trump. He's got a plan. His progressive views have ruined your state. He's the perfect Democrat candidate.
Well, I think that says it perfect right there. I mean, sometimes the AI generator doesn't get it right, but his progressive views have ruined his state. He's the perfect Democrat candidate. I think it's perfect. And to your point, Craig, I think we're going to have to call that out every minute of every day as they go through this this folly of the coming weeks. All right, we are going to lose Representative David Freese because he's got to go to do his job and represent the people. So we're grateful for your time. But David, there was a topic you wanted to cover that I want to go straight to before we lose you. So we're going to go a little bit out of order on the agenda here. But I know there's a bill that Representative Harry Benton has brought forth. Chris is going to want to talk about this because it ties to Steve Ballot with the controversy happening there. But David, you wanted to talk about how this bill would ban flying the American flag upside down. Let me pass it to you for your thoughts.
Yeah, so when I first heard about this, I was really surprised because flying the flag upside down actually means something, and as a veteran, I get it, and I was asked this question before, what do I think when I see that? And I have seen that, and my immediate reaction is why? I asked that question, why? Are they really in distress? What is the circumstances that led to that individual doing that? And then I'm asking myself, what's Bennett's thoughts about the flag, seriously? Would he want or try to ban, say, these pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas people from burning the flag? I haven't seen that bill yet. Or how about other protesters that want to burn the American flag? I haven't seen anybody put a bill out to ban that. We have the free speech here. Obviously value that free speech. So I think it's a little comical. I don't believe sincerity on that, and yeah, that's where I'm at on that issue.
Well, let me pass it over to Chris and David. We respect your time, so whenever you need to jump off, feel free to do so. Chris, on your side, this is in reference to, or this is brought up because of the controversy over Steve Ballot in Homer Township, where he flew the flag upside down there in the township offices after Trump's guilty verdict in that situation. So that's where this came from, and clearly it was a very politically motivated move to attack Steve Ballot. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, that's basically what my thoughts are. I mean, I don't think Harry really gave a rat's ass about the American flag prior to Steve flying the flag upside down. And look, Steve's a friend of mine. I don't necessarily agree with what he did. Steve does what Steve believes is right, and I respect the fact that he does that. But that's all this is that Benton's trying to gain some political points. He's trying to take advantage of something that was in the news for a few weeks. It's not in the news anymore. He's going to try and get his political points out of it, and who knows if it'll save his reelection chances. But I think it's just trying to score political points.
Well, and that's what it is, right? I mean, Benton's in a tough election, which a week ago was tough. Now it's probably even more tough. He's got a really strong opponent there in his district, and people are starting to look really closely at that race to see if Benton might lose. So, as you said, it's clearly a politically motivated move. And to David's point, was this done out of respect for the flag, or was this done for political gain? And clearly, it was done for political gain. We've got veterans on this podcast, and I think everyone would universally agree, if you're going to do something related to the flag, it better be done out of reverence to our country and to that flag, not for political gain.
So I'll jump in here since obviously it's a neighboring town. I think what Ballot did was absolutely foolish, and also to score political points. And what's being done in return is foolish and to score politically points. And they both look foolish and not like serious representatives when they do that. And speaking as a veteran, people have a First Amendment right. Even things we don't like. The answer to speech is more speech. It's not to stop speech. And I served, and I'm sure that Craig served as well, some when the whole flag burning thing was a big deal in the 90s. My stance then is the same as it is now. I find it distasteful and disrespectful and hurtful to burn the flag, but I will also defend your right to do it, and did defend your right to do it. And so this kind of falls into this scenario, and I don't think either one of them looks good with this. I think it's all politically motivated on both sides.
Fair point. All right, let's go back to our agenda, back in order here. We got to talk about this. So at 3 a.m. in the morning, Palestinian protesters marched outside of Congressman Brad Schneider's home. For those who don't know, Brad Schneider is Jewish. This is continuation of this these actions by pro-Palestinian protesters that, frankly, from my opinion and many that I've spoken to, just hurt their cause. I mean, 3 a.m. in a neighborhood in Highland Park, protesting outside of a congressperson's home, not their office, not some event, but their house. There's kids. This is just taking it further and further. And I think it shows just how far these people are going to take this as we get closer and closer to the convention in Chicago. People who say that we're going to be okay in Chicago, it's going to be fine, they've got it under control. These people clearly have there's no low to which they won't stoop to push their cause. This makes me even more nervous for, every friend I have in Chicago. I've told them, get out of town during the DNC. Don't be around for this. This is not going to go well. And I think when you see actions like this, 3 a.m. in a neighborhood to be marching and chanting and causing a disruption outside somebody's home, it's getting a bit extreme, I think. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, Collin, I mean, that was not a protest. That was pure and simple intimidation. And that is against the law. You're masked, 3 a.m. residents. I mean, where is law enforcement? But more likely, where's our prosecution, right? That's what's failing right now on the Democrat side is, if we get to one of those questions on the OG clown, I've got one, but if you aren't prosecuting, or, I mean, I even hate to say it, but at a minimum arresting, but then you see charges drop 60 days later, that's not a deterrent at all. So if we lack any deterrence, I think that's pale in comparison to what could happen in the next 4 months from that side. And I'm not sure, if their cause is Gaza and Palestinians, these type of antics hurt that cause. But I'm not convinced that that's actually their cause. I think that ultimately they're taking advantage of that conflict to instigate and foment divisiveness. And I think that's their cause, in which case they're absolutely meeting it when they do something like that.
Well, and Craig, to your point, Highland Park, I don't know if the congressman's home is on the Lake County side or the Cook County side, but it doesn't matter. There were no arrests, but if there were, both the Cook County prosecutor, the state's attorney, and the Lake County state's attorney have a track record where they have publicly said, we're just going to let you right back out. So there are no deterrents to actions like this. And so to your point, they have no reason to not go do this at 3 a.m, because even if police did arrest them, they know there are going to be no consequences to their lawlessness.
It's appalling, and there is an Illinois state law that basically forbids this. So they should have been arrested. They would have been arrested, as you probably know, Collin. They would have been arrested here in Orland Park if they'd have done that. But it is concerning. It's concerning. It's concerning for a couple of reasons. So I'll give you an example. On Monday this week, my dog's going nuts at 5:20 in the morning, which he normally doesn't do. Figure it's a rabbit or a bird or something that he sees at the crack of dawn. No. As we checked our Ring camera a couple hours later, it was somebody shoving something into my mailbox, about certain things as mayor. It's like, and that's just a violation of my space in many ways, right? And that pales. That's nothing compared to what Snyder had to deal with. And I think that even my opponent for Congress, Sean Cassidy, has been dealing with some of this, and there's been some people reveling in that. And I said that you should be reveling in the fact that people are protesting in front of his house. It's a violation. It's wrong. It's wrong if they do it to me. It's wrong if they do it to someone else. People are serving whether we agree with them or disagree with them. And what's really concerning about this is the bigger play here is to stop good people from running for office. That's their goal, is to stop good people from stepping up, because no one wants to deal with this. And if good people aren't willing to deal with it, then it's going to get a lot worse.
Well, Keith, that's been their strategy against you, right? For the entire time you've been running and been in office, is just try to make it so awful for you that hopefully you step away and they can put someone in who's, more allied with their cause. These are the kind of tactics they've been playing on you for years.
For sure. They've been doing it to me. They've been doing it to my wife and family, as you know, and they just don't know us very well. As my wife so eloquently put on the board floor one day, if you think this is going to stop us from running, you don't know me.
I want to go back to Keith. We're going to go out of order again and talk crime because it's a great segue. But just in case, Michael or Chris, you guys have thoughts on this, or I know, Chris, you already talked about how really it's going to be the Palestinian, Gaza, Israeli, sort of this whole issue is really what's hurting the Democratic base in many ways. Is this a continuation of that, or any thoughts on this?
Oh yeah, it's certainly a continuation of that, and it's just as I've spoken about in previous SFRs. It's just a taste of what you're going to get come August. And could you imagine for a moment that, let's move back a topic. Let's talk about J.B. Pritzker potentially being the Democratic nominee for president. J.B. Pritzker currently, based on what his previous statements on the issue are, sits to the right of Joe Biden on the Israel-Palestine issue. So could you imagine a scenario where you have an open floor fight, J.B. Pritzker leading in the clubhouse, and you got every Palestinian and leftist activist in the entire country waiting outside his downtown Chicago? It is going to be riots in the streets. It's going to be riots on the convention floor. So it's all brewing up to that point. So be prepared come Democratic convention time, to look at the views of these potential replacements for Biden on the convention floor, because that's going to affect what's going on outside.
And
yeah,
Chris,
go ahead, Craig.
point, if you guys look at heyjackass.com, right? He's the guy that has the website, tracks all the crime statistics and stuff, but he has different shirts. I think I saw his Chicago DNC 2024 is a hand holding a Molotov cocktail. So talk about where we think Chicago may be headed, depending on how this convention plays out. Right now, hey, if we get the Rules Committee here in mid-July and they nominate Biden at that point, it beats the August 7th deadline in Ohio. Now it's not an open convention. Now it's a rah-rah convention. Maybe things are a little different. But yeah, we've got another week or two to kind of see how this develops. One, in the media, and then two, behind closed doors.
And to jump on what Chris said about if the Democrats look like that, please, I implore the Republicans that are watching this in Illinois, for all of the differences we may have within the party and within individuals, act like adults and with decorum, and have discussions and debates, and don't act like that. Because if you have now separated yourself from them, if you act like adults, which many of us, as we know, have not necessarily in the last several years. So let's do that when we have disagreements. That's what I implore the Republican Party to do, because it's a huge opportunity to change our fortunes in the state of Illinois.
I love that point, Chris or Keith, and really what we've seen in the data. And I was up in Vermont this last week training Republican candidates up there for office, and we talked about how they've got a Republican governor there. The Northeast has had good success electing Republican governors because they elect leaders who are governing leaders. They're not overly partisan. They're the adults in the room. We've talked about how that's what the election data shows us, that regardless of your party, voters right now are just looking for adults that they can vote for to elect. And that used to be the Republican Party. And if the Democrats are going to go down in disarray these next 4 months, which it highly looks like it's going to happen, if we can show a contrast and show that we're the adults in the room, you're going to see a red tsunami across this country. So Keith, I think that's an awesome point, and I want to echo it.
And you can be a conservative and very conservative and still act like an adult. That's the other important thing to note.
Yep, absolutely. Keith, let's stick with you. We'll go slightly out of order here because this is a great segue into crime. In Orland Park, you guys have shown that an agenda that focuses on safety and holding criminals accountable makes a difference and keeps neighborhoods safe, especially because you have two different counties. You've got a portion of your village has Cook County with the wonderful prosecutor in air quotes, Kim Foxx. So you guys are ground zero for being able to show the difference of a pro-crime agenda from the state's attorney on one side and a more common sense agenda on the other side. What are you seeing about crime, and what does that mean, and how could that be replicated in other areas of the state?
Well, I think it shows when you hold people accountable that you can keep your town safe. And even in Cook County, what we do is we arrest and we spend time investigating. And Cook County, they require mountains and mountains and mountains of evidence. You look at it, you go, are you kidding me? This isn't enough yet? And we just continue, and we just keep working at it and giving them more and more until they can't say no. Almost everything they bring to prosecution for us, they get a conviction because they couldn't possibly not, because there's so much evidence. But we've decided to spend a lot more money on investigations to make sure that these people know they're going to get caught. And even in Cook County, they will eventually get prosecuted. And guess what? Then the criminals stop coming here. They go someplace where it's a little bit easier, or maybe they won't do that. And I think so. Kim Foxx put her agenda in 4 or 5 months before I was elected, and we started to see a spike in violent crime. So we changed some of the things that we were doing to help put that, keep that under control, which we've done. I think what we're seeing is other counties and other areas are seeing that increase in crime because of the Safety Act. Because in Cook County, we've been dealing with this since 2017. Safety Act is basically Kim Foxx's policy, right? But every other county now is catching up to Cook County. And so now they're having to deal with it. So we really haven't seen a huge change. Our change that we've seen with the Safety Act in particular is it's retail theft has gone up. We've seen a little bit of an increase in that, which when you start to think about it, kind of makes sense, because before they might be held for a day or two, and now they're not held at all. And so now they can go back to their job if they have one. They can take care of their kids at home, and so they're willing to take the risk of stealing $400 or $500 or $1,000 worth of stuff, whereas before maybe they weren't, because they might end up in jail for a week and then they lose their job and then their life gets a lot more miserable. So, and I think that also tells you that if you make it so that most of us, everyone sitting on this call, we don't steal because it's wrong. There's other people that don't steal because of the penalty for stealing. Well, we need to make the penalties enough so that they won't steal for those people.
And haven't you seen, and I don't know how much of this you can share, so forgive me if I put you in a bad spot here, but haven't you seen even criminals pay attention to, are they on the Cook County side or not on the Cook County side when they get caught doing stuff in your town or your village?
For sure. I mean, they know where it's just like if they knew which places were not calling the police and not filing charges, which is why we put in our business license code, it requires businesses now to cooperate with police. So we had one department store in particular that would not file charges. So we started fining them for not filing charges. And then they started filing charges. And guess what? Theft stopped, because the criminals found out that, oh, by the way, they're going to call the police. So I think we know that. And yeah, so I think, hey, it's none of this is rocket science. It's common sense, right?
Well, and I think that's what Republicans have been screaming for. And regardless of whether it's, over one bill in Springfield or not, there's an agenda here. I mean, Craig and I just talked previously on a previous topic about Lake County and Cook County and the state's attorneys there not prosecuting criminals. And we've gotten to a point now where we can't say criminals. We've gotten to a point now where the city of Chicago isn't going to inform parents when the kids misbehave, and they're not even going to call it misbehavior because we don't want to stigmatize them. We're just gotten to this really soft on crime agenda, this far left agenda that frankly has taken root in Illinois. And let's be honest, if Pritzker runs nationally, it's going to be part of his agenda nationwide. So we're ground zero for these policies that have not worked. And Keith, you and Orland Park specifically have seen it not work. And so you've put in common sense policies to work around it. You might have mayors across the country coming to you for advice if Pritzker has his way and starts putting these policies in place nationally. Anybody else have thoughts on crime before we carry on to our next topic? All right, let's go back to, let's talk economy. So there's a number of things that have happened over the last week that I want to use as a kickstart to a conversation about the economy. Michael, you flagged this, that a report shows that full-time workers need to earn almost $30 an hour just to afford a two-bedroom apartment nowadays. John Deere's laying off 279 employees in Illinois. The gas tax just went up, so now that's 47 cents a gallon. You're looking at Pritzker, and politicians are just making it worse. Pritzker wants to ban hotels with fewer than 50 rooms from using single-use bottles of shampoo. So a lot of those small businesses, those family-run hotels are screaming about that additional cost. Darren LaHood was on with our buddy Patrick Fingston last week on his podcast, talking about all the taxpayer subsidies that are going to Goshen and how that should be cut off because of human rights abuses. Pritzker's given more money to Rivian. Meanwhile, they're announcing billion-dollar losses. You just see a lot of these policies that are from Illinois Democrats that are making the economy, as the economy is getting worse, they're doubling down on these policies. They're raising the cost of living. They're causing property taxes to go up, like with the grocery tax repeal. A lot of these actions coming out of Springfield are raising the cost of living for working families in the state at a time when they can't afford to survive. I guess, Craig, I want to start with you since you're the lawmaker we have with us still. What are you seeing on this? As this cost of living skyrockets, it's working families who are struggling, and clearly Democrat policies are not working for them.
Yeah, the one that pops out to me, I think there was a guy that duplicated his Walmart shopping receipt from 2021 in 2024, and it was 3 times higher. I think it went from 126 to like 412. I think in my time, I've come to the conclusion that I don't actually think Democrats have an ideological play. I think their ideology is to use taxpayer dollars on whatever business or organization is going to be their future donors. And I look back to say, where did the pro-life Democrats go? Oh, they figured out how much tax dollars could go to Planned Parenthood and how much that would support their campaigns. Now it's green energy, Rivian. It's going to be Goshen and the CCP. It's nonprofits that can return So to me, that's a concern, right? If the data points really show that their policy isn't for policy's sake, it's to be able to use taxpayer dollars that turn around into campaign dollars. That's, I'd argue, treasonous, but that's the reality. From a pure law perspective, they've gone after your retail. They capped the retailer discount. They're going to force the interchange fees to not be applied to sales tax and to tips, which arguably you could say could be a good thing, but that had to be argued as a compensation for the retailer discount cap. But every one of these bills, you get the feeling that, no kidding, they believe that business in Illinois and residents in Illinois are kind of that two-tiered piggy bank, right? The big coins drop down to the bottom, and when you turn it over, you can't get them back out. And they think that if you just shake it hard enough, you can get the rest out of that piggy bank. And that's a concern.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's bigger than just giving things away to the businesses that donate to them. It's also giving things away to their voting blocks. So you look at the latest, now we're going to bail out all the people with healthcare debt. All the taxpayers are going to do that, right? We're going to bail out anyone with has healthcare debt. You look at, and what people don't understand too is the hidden costs. So what they do as a mayor, obviously, the municipalities, when they make all these mandates for employers that they have to give time off and they have to give all of these other things to workers. Well, most of our workforce is unionized. We've negotiated this already. Now you're going past you're usurping our negotiations with a union who already have a really good deal, and you're giving them even more. And the taxpayer has to pay for that because it ends up going back to them, which means we either have to raise your taxes or we have to cut services elsewhere. That's ultimately what happens. And so this happens repeatedly over and over and over again. And, at the same time, you see, the property taxes going up in the suburbs, the south suburbs getting crushed on that. Well, when you're not sharing revenue like you used to share revenue, when you have unfunded mandates like you've had before, all this stuff helps raise those taxes, and they try and blame it on all the municipalities when in actuality it's the state, it's the governor and the Democrats in the state that are basically creating the property tax problem as well.
Yeah, Butler, I know you haven't been on. You flagged this topic like 4 weeks ago, and you haven't had a chance to talk about it. Just with the grocery tax, the Mount Vernon mayor putting out that letter about how the grocery tax repeal creates a massive hole in his budget, and obviously many municipalities around the state face that same problem. This is again that hidden. No one pays attention to this level, not like we do. Average voters don't get this, but you're gonna have to make up that revenue somehow. And as Keith said, you're either going to cut services or you got to raise property taxes.
Well,
$2.6 million for us for the grocery tax.
How much? I'm sorry, Keith, I missed that. How much was it?
$2.6 million for Orland Park for the grocery tax. The LGDF shortage is $6 million a year, so that's $8.6 million. The governor likes to touts that he gives us cannabis money and gaming money. It's about $400,000. $8.6 million, $400,000 doesn't exactly cover that. So $8.2 million, that's about 15% of our budget. So,
sheesh. Butler, go ahead.
I was just going to say that they basically were, with that repeal of the 1%, the 1 cent grocery tax, they're basically like giving away other municipalities' money. They're not impacted by that tax no longer existing. So now these townships and municipalities across the state that are trying to figure out how to make their budgets work, how to pay for police, fire, all of these things, they're left trying to figure it out. And in some of these communities like Keith's, it's a big dollar amount they're going to have to find. And what do? Do a grocery tax of their own, raise property taxes. I mean, none of those things are good for our constituents. That's for sure.
Oh, and if they implement their own grocery tax, here's a little known fact. The state's going to skim money off the top of that. So they don't collect money on it now. So actually the state is going to make money. If everyone implemented the same grocery tax that was just taken away, if every town did it, the state would actually make money. I think it's $7 or $8 million a year is what the state would actually make off of that. So
no one's reported on that. That's the first time hearing of that. I appreciate that little nugget. Sheesh. All right. Final thoughts on cost of living and just the struggle that it is for the people in your constituencies, or, Chris and Michael, as you guys are knocking on doors, just any final thoughts on this? Because honestly, every poll I see, every comment I see from people, just scroll on Twitter, go on social media. people are struggling right now to afford paying their bills, and costs just keep going up. This is the issue going into November. Yeah, we talk political drama, but nobody cares who's president. Nobody cares about social issues when they can't afford to pay groceries, when their medical bills are unaffordable, when they can't afford insurance, when they can't afford to fill their gas tank. Nobody cares about the rest of this drama. This is the issue right now.
Well, going into Thursday's debate, my fundamental mentality going into this November election was we're finally going to see if people's hunger is more important for them or if people's, emotions are more important for them. And that's what we were going to finally determine in the 2024 election. Because if you're going hungry at night and you can't afford to pay your bills, it looks like it's going to be a Trump election. But if you actually have money and you're not struggling, you're going to care about abortion and sex democracy and all that sort of thing. I think that still exists going into November election, but there's a lot of different dynamics at play right now. It's kind of changing the political landscape, but certainly still the case. I mean, if you're struggling right now, you're moving towards the Republicans on this issue.
Yeah. All right. Well, as we close down the episode, we've got a fun segment that we've started doing that we've kind of dipped our toe in, but we're going to try to do it in full this week, where we name the OG and the clown of the week. Like to focus on Illinois politics, but it can be a national figure. OG, for those of you who don't know, current internet slang, original gangster, or somebody who's a badass or did something great, and then clown. I don't have to explain what that means. Curious if anybody's got any thoughts, any nominations on who should fit in either of those categories for the last week or so.
So
I've got one. Go ahead, Craig.
Up with the clown, and I hate to do this to him, but Rep. Bob Morgan, right? I know he was there in Highland Park during the shooting, but he's out there touting the Supreme Court not taking up an injunction, and his quote was, "Every day that assault weapons and high-capacity magazines are banned in Illinois represents fewer gun deaths and reduced gun violence." Is he not looking at Chicago and the South and West sides? Is he not looking on X or Instagram, the number of extended magazine clips and illegal firearms that are in the hands of kids, young teenagers in Chicago? I mean, he can try and sway this, but with what Justice Thomas said, this will go back before the Supreme Court. And this just comes down to the Democrats. I talked about, the economy and their ideological stuff. From a legislative perspective, I don't know if they care whether something's ultimately going to be found unconstitutional. Pritzker will call this a 3-year win. The number of new firearms that didn't get bought, the number of shut down gun stores. But the reality is it's highly likely going to be found unconstitutional. And at that point, now there's people that have action against the state and the legislature for the actions taken. So to me, that quote in his touting that was the clown of the week act.
Well, and it goes right to the hypocrisy, right? I mean, just in the last few weeks, Kim Foxx has come out and said she's not going to prosecute gun crimes if they were caught during a routine traffic stop. I mean, you've got action after action by Democrats with this pro-crime agenda to not get guns off the streets, whether legal or illegal. From a policy perspective, they're not trying to get guns off the streets. Meanwhile, they want to stop it at a higher level when they're basically just taking away rights from law-abiding citizens, while they refuse to take away guns from people who are not law-abiding. I mean, it's just, I don't understand. I do understand. I get it. It's politics, but the hypocrisy on this issue specifically, I think I know my buddy over at the ISRA will tell you they want guns out of the hands of those who want to use them to do harm. They want guns out of the hands of non-law-abiding citizens. And right now, the Democrats' pro-crime agenda, they're actually saying, nah, we're fine with it. We're not going to prosecute that. I mean, I don't understand how you connect those dots. Any other thoughts on either? Go ahead.
So I have a nominee for the clown of the week, and that's Maria Pappas. Because she came out and with these tax bills and she blamed it on municipalities and school districts. And we all know school districts are a big part of our property tax bill, but I'm looking at my property tax bill that came in the mail today. Orland Park is 5.5% of our overall property tax bill. 5.5%. We're clearly not driving my 31% increase in property tax. In fact, Orland Park's levy went down, but Cook County taxes are up 58%.
Ooh.
So school districts are up about 31%, so tracking with my overall increase, but Cook counties are up 58%. So who's the problem here? It's the assessor, it's the governor, it's Cook County. They're the problem, not the municipalities.
And they do like to shift the blame. That's for dang sure.
They do. And it's nice of her as well, for the first time ever, to get out a bill not in November, where we have to pay it in November. Now all of a sudden they get it to us in July, and now it's got to be paid in August, 3 months sooner. Thank you very much. Not only you get a 30% increase, but you got to pay it 3 months earlier than what you were saving for. So great work. That's going to look good on everybody's mortgages that pay their taxes through their mortgage.
Yeah, I found it interesting the first time that Kagi and everyone got their act together and actually got the bills out on time is in an election year. I thought that was probably poor planning on their part.
And they're all wrong.
Anyone else have thoughts?
They're all
wrong.
And
they were all wrong too. Yeah.
My OG of the week, it was going nationally. I wanted to give credit to Bill O'Reilly, of all people. Never thought I would ever say those words out loud on live television or live podcast, wherever the hell this is. Bill O'Reilly did a great 4D chess move by basically, I think, making up a source and saying that somebody in the White House says Biden's resigning, and then forcing the entire media to say, no, Biden's our guy. We're standing behind him, actually. So I got to give Bill O'Reilly credit. He kind of kicked off the whole coalescing behind Biden and then kind of moving everything in this direction. So Bill O'Reilly, I never liked you ever before this, but good job.
I grew up watching Bill O'Reilly. I always liked how he said, like, name in town, if you wish to opine, like at the end of the episodes. It was classic. But my clown of the week is the fake news media, because over the course of Biden's presidency, they've either been incompetent or complicit in this Biden White House's cover up of how incompetent President Biden is. So they look like serious clowns.
Yeah. And Michael, honestly, I feel like I kind of align with you on this. As I said, I was talking to Abby about this. Like, I don't think Biden actually did that badly in the debate. For him, that was actually pretty good. I think the impetus here, the onus is on the media. It's on Democrats for covering up these problems for so many years. And now it's coming to light, and it's too late for them to do anything about it. I mean, so I think you're right, Michael. I think you hit it on the head on that. Anyone else have thoughts on nominations for either of the categories?
I have an OG of the week. The Supreme Court, the Chevron decision, and reversing Chevron is going to be the most important decision of all of our lifetimes to reel back this administrative state.
Interesting.
Also,
all right,
Supreme Court for exonerating Richard Nixon. Don't forget that. That happened this week.
Yeah, we didn't get to corruption and how that decision is going to help Mike Madigan, but we'll probably get to that in the coming weeks. All right, I'd say to our watchers, or Craig, were you going to jump in, or we get all your topics in there?
I'll get it in, because in what Chris was talking about, right? We used to hear Senator Sandoval down in Springfield say, "What's in it for me?" Well, given the Supreme Court decision, that line's going to be, well, what do I get for that vote last week, last month, last year? Because now it's a gratuity, and it's going to make it worse, unfortunately, in a place like Illinois.
So in theory, the Supreme Court could be both the clown and OG of the week in the same week. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
To our viewers and listeners, I'd ask you guys, who do you guys think is the clown or OG of the week? Weigh in, send us an email, post on social media. We'd love to hear from you. We're going to shift over to closing thoughts. We've got some great guests this week. Obviously, we're thankful for David Freese and his time in joining us. Craig, let me go over to you and your closing thoughts as we shut down the podcast for the week.
Yeah, I appreciate being able to be on. It's all going to be about Independence Day. And what I'm hoping people spend a little bit of time on is pondering, what was it that the founders were fighting against and why? And, not that you should do it this weekend, right? Have some fun, but at some point, relatively soon, go back and re-examine the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence or the Federalist Papers, right? And then understand what they were looking to avoid again, right? And that is a way to couch why we've been so blessed in our time so far. But we've got to keep that understanding that without keeping track of what they fought against, we may find ourselves recreating it, and that would be a shame.
Appreciate that thought. Chris, what are your final thoughts for the week?
I didn't expect to go next. My final thoughts for the week is pay attention to what's going on in the media, everybody. It's going to be an interesting few weeks going up before the Democratic National Convention. We'll see who the next Democratic nominee for president is. Apparently, democracy does not matter. Your vote in the Democratic primaries did not matter if you voted in the Democratic primaries. They will just choose for you. Enjoy the 4th of July weekend. Do not watch White Sox baseball. Watch the Milwaukee Brewers. They're a much better product. And hopefully Jerry Reinsdorf does not sell off this entire team, but he's going to. So happy 4th of July, everyone.
Yes.
Happy Independence Day.
As long as he sells the team while he's selling off the team, I think we'll all be okay with that. Michael, you were good this week. You brought some passion, but you don't get the fire award of the week. So you go ahead and go next.
All right, that sounds good. I was just going to say, 4th of July, Independence Day weekend. Hopefully you can, relax a little bit, enjoy some time with your families, because the real campaigning starts once this weekend's over. So let's get after it.
Well, and you preach the walk, man. You talk it, you preach it, you do it. I love seeing all your posts about being out there knocking on doors. So keep at it, man. You're doing a great job. Keith, you brought the fire this week. You get the final word. Close this down. What are your closing thoughts?
So I think we've all seen that today our democracy is under assault at all levels. But I also want to remind everyone, we're just a day away from our 248th birthday when 56 patriots signed the Declaration of Independence. And these men risked everything by signing that document to create this country. They risked their families, their fortunes, their lives. And you might recognize a few of the names, right? John Hancock, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, Samuel Adams. But the other 51, you're probably not familiar with. They were just ordinary people doing an extraordinary thing. And since the beginning of America, we have been a nation filled with ordinary people who do ordinary things. Through all of our trials and tribulations, America has persevered, overcome, grown, and improved. And while, we can definitely say that we have continued work to do, and we face challenges today nationally, statewide, and locally. As long as good people stay active and involved, I'm confident we can meet these challenges just like we have for the last 240 years, because we live in the greatest beacon for freedom and liberty and the greatest country in mankind's history.
Well, that's a perfect place to end the episode. Thank you, Keith. Thank you to our guests, including David. We're really appreciative of his time as well. Thank you to Lane Davis, our producer, for putting in so much work. He's going to be working over the holiday to get this episode out on time on Friday. So thanks to Lane. To our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you guys sticking with us every week. We're going to be back next week in your inbox with even more political analysis. I'm sure there'll be plenty more juicy topics to cover, because let's be real, it's politics. It's an election year. We never get through half our agenda on these things. So we're going to get back in your inbox with the latest juicy stories next week. In the meantime, go out there and celebrate our country, and we will catch you guys next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.